Them. I feel confident that my son is able to, not that he likes it any more than he did before, but he is able to communicate through writing. It's one of his least favorite things to do, but when he does it, when he finishes a product, it's a good product. And so I always try to make sure that he understands that. And then my daughter, she's having much less struggle with like sentence structure and things like that. She knows when to use a comma and when to not use a comma and things like that now. And so I think we've been able to meet their individual goals very well with this. Yeah, but I felt like it was a good, solid high school English program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EIW Experience. I'm here today with Melissa Felkins, and I'm very excited to hear about her journey and experience with Essentials in Writing and Essentials in Literature. So glad to have you here today, Melissa.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to start off by just asking you, what was your experience like before you came to Essentials in Writing? What were you looking for? What were the struggles you were having with finding or using a curriculum, and the same with your students? What were their struggles?
Well, we had my senior, he has ADHD, dysgraphia, and dyslexia. And so writing has always been a struggle for him. He can write really well once he gets started, but he has a really hard time getting started. And so I just wanted to make sure that as a senior that we had all of our bases covered, that we had covered all of the essentials, and that he had a strong grasp of how to communicate in the written language, as he goes out of high school. And so when I found Essentials in Writing, I felt like it covered everything very well to be able to make sure that he had those basics covered before he went out into the world. And then my freshman coming up, she had a few struggles with sentence structure. And I liked that Essentials in Writing covered sentence structure to start out with, and didn't just assume that all high school students know how to write a good sentence. She can write well as well, but there was just a few things that as she was writing sentences and such that the same mistakes kind of over and over again. And so we needed something that would solidify that for her as what it was correct and what was incorrect.
With your son struggling with ADHD, what were your main concerns when looking for a curriculum that, you wanted to be sure that it, and obviously to cover everything, of course, but there's a learning style that seems to need to fit to students that really struggle with that. So what were you looking for? What were your determining factors on what would work?
Short lessons. That's the first thing. Covering one concept at a time, so that he could so that he could grasp that one concept before he moved on to the next thing. And then the video lessons was another thing, having that type of interaction. So it's not just all written text that he's having to read, but actually being able to watch the videos and watch you go through the examples and see what it's supposed to look like.
Got it. And before you came to Essentials in Writing, I know you talked about the actual content that what we were covering, but are there certain features of curriculum that you were looking for that work better, like in your homeschool situation? Because a lot of parents come to me and every situation is different. Some parents want to be very involved. Others feel very worried about being able to teach writing. And so for you and your situation, what were you coming to the table with in terms of like teaching or not teaching and just curriculum in general?
Yeah, I wasn't really too worried about the teaching aspect of it. I'm a former public school teacher and counselor, and I have a PhD in educational psychology. So I kind of have the writing part of that covered, but sometimes even if you know how to do it yourself, that doesn't mean your child always understands in the same way that you do. And so having this presented in the step-by-step manageable chunks was something that really was appealing to us.
Yes, that's so true. And I always think about that in terms of, teaching any particular subject area. For myself, writing always made sense. I don't know why, but I was always just gifted in that area. But I couldn't teach it the way it makes sense to me, because it just doesn't work. Most students, or a lot of students, just struggle with the concept of taking creative ideas that are in their head and putting them into some sort of a cohesive composition, using all the right words and communicating well. And so we really do have to focus on teaching it in a way that works, as opposed to just how we do it. And I definitely found that out when I was homeschooling my own kiddos, because I struggle with math. I was in tutoring every day of algebra, college algebra. And so I needed somebody to help me a lot with that. And then when it came time for me to teach it, oh my goodness, it was a struggle. So, tell me a little bit about your experience, and we're going to talk about essentials in writing first, just about a little bit about your experience on what you noticed happening. And it can be in terms of just the experience from your perspective, or what you noticed with your students, how they were excelling or improving, anything that you want to share about that particular part of the journey.
Okay. Well, it took us a little bit to get started, to be honest with you. They were having a little bit of a problem on the assignments when they needed to come up with the content, right, where it says write these sentences in this format or whatever. Mm-hmm. They were getting stuck on the content and they weren't getting the concepts, because they would just sit there way too long trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to write about, And so I just went in and wrote up a few sentences and paragraphs, and I would send them to them in Microsoft Word and have them correct them that way. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of individualized things a little bit.
Absolutely.
In that way for them. I think it goes back to the ADHD and all of that, mm-hmm. As far as the getting stuck on the content rather than the concept. And so for our needs, we did that. But then when we got to the paragraphs and the essays and even into the research paper, we really liked the way that you carried the structure from one to the next. Mm-hmm. It really helped because they were able to say, okay, this is how a paragraph works. And when we get to the essays, we're just expanding on that.
Yes.
And then when we get to the research paper, we're expanding on that a little bit more, but it's basically the same, format as far as the opening and then the details and mm-hmm. and so on and so forth. And so that was very helpful to have that consistency.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. How did your students respond to the fact that I model everything that I teach? So, sometimes we as teachers, we just want to present knowledge. It makes so much sense to us, and we think that students will understand what we're talking about. But I learned early on in my teaching career that I needed to show students what I'm talking about. So I can say all day long that a paragraph needs an opening, some details and examples, and a closing, and describe even vocally what those are, but that doesn't make sense until we actually model what we're talking about and in the context of a composition. So how did your students react to that, the fact that we model what we teach?
That was very helpful. And it was helpful for me also because I could say, okay, what did Mr. Stevens do? Look back at what he did, look at the examples in the text. So that was really very helpful. And then also the graphic organizers, mm-hmm. Those follow the same pattern. And so that was very helpful as well.
Yes. One of the things that I really love about Essentials in Writing is the fact that we help students build that content in the graphic organizer before they ever put a word in a sentence, any mm-hmm. drafting at all. For your, you had mentioned before that your students write well. Was it a struggle to get them to use the graphic organizer if they felt pretty confident to just go ahead and start with a draft? Or, what was your experience with that?
For my daughter, who was a freshman, it was more so for her because she doesn't like to follow. She just wants to let it flow,
yes.
Whatever is in her. So having her understand the concept that it needs to have certain elements to it,
right.
There's creative writing and then there's structured writing, and mm-hmm. so helping her to understand the difference between that was a little bit of a struggle from time to time. but I think she gets it now. I think she understands, the difference, and that sometimes it's okay for her to just write whatever comes to mind, but other times she needs to
Mhm,
follow the structure. And
mhm.
so that was really helpful.
Yeah, excellent. And did you feel that I mean, obviously we have more than one children in the home working from the same curriculum. Did you feel that there were different outcomes, or, were they pretty much in line with your individual students? In other words, that the progress that you saw or that they made wasn't just kind of cookie cutter, in a sense.
No, I think it really met the needs that we had, the goals that we started out with. I think we were able to do that for each one of them. I feel confident that my son is able to, not that he likes it any more than he did before, but he is able to communicate
Hmm.
through writing. It's one of his least favorite things to do, but when he does it, when he finishes a product, it's a good product. And so
Hmm.
I always try to make sure that he understands that. And then my daughter, she's having much less struggle with like sentence structure and things like that. She knows when to use a comma and when to not use a comma and
Yes.
things like that now. And so I think we've been able to meet their individual goals very well with this.
That open-ended sentence structure work in the beginning can be a little bit dry, just
Mm-hmm.
because we're really focusing on the mechanical side of dependent and independent clauses and how eventually that is used to create a variety of sentence structures so that everything doesn't musically sound the same. If you only
Right.
use all simple sentence, it has a musical quality to it that's just dry. And so,
Right.
but it can be when it's mechanical like that. But it's great to hear you say that you saw that carrying over into your daughter's writing. So, in other words, during that revision process, when they're revising for sentence structure, she's bringing up some of those things that she learned so that
Yes.
she can communicate more effectively with a variety of sentence structures versus just, you know, how it typically happens.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. So the last question that I have for you in about essentials in writing was, how was your experience? So, as a parent, you're busy. There are so many things that are happening. How was your experience just, using the curriculum with your kids?
It worked out really well. In the beginning, it took just a little bit to get into the flow and realize how the routine worked.
Mhm.
But once we got into that and figured out how it was going to fit into our schedule, it flowed very well. Um, Honestly, the most that I had to play a role was in helping them come up with topics, because even though you supplied some great topics for them, they didn't always want to write about those topics.
Right.
And so, they just get stuck on that. And I don't know what to write about. I don't know what to write about. I'm like, he's given you 3 topics here. Choose one and write
Use
about
one.
it. But, it doesn't always work that way. So I'd say that was the most, the role that I played the most. And then, revision and things at the end. But, the fact that you've got rubrics and things like that in there,
Hmm.
I, coming from the background that I do, um, I'm real big on showing that to them beforehand and saying, this is what
Yes,
you need to produce.
absolutely.
And so, letting them, the grading process wasn't really that difficult because they knew what was expected of them beforehand.
Hmm. Man, I love to hear you say that, because a lot of parents that come into writing with a little apprehension, they're not sure if they should allow students to know what's expected. But most definitely, the rubric is going to give you the guide to know this is what we expect, and if you want to
Right.
score here, this is what you have to produce. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to hear that you were showing them the rubrics before they ever began the writing process. So
Yes.
awesome. Yeah, so we'll switch over to essentials in literature, and essentials in literature. The approach that we take to literature is very much like writing. We try to break it up into those bite-sized pieces, and we try to also make it palatable for students who may not love literature by
Mhm.
using short stories and poetry and nonfiction excerpts and things like that, as opposed to maybe doing 10 novels, in a year. So yeah, just tell me a little bit about the experience that you all had. What were some of the features that you really liked, and that you thought was helpful, and what was their overall attitude about the literary work during the year?
Okay. Well, we really liked the way that everything was broken down into days, and the short stories were really neat. We really honestly haven't focused that much on short stories over the years. We've been that family that reads 10 novels in a year,
Yes.
and that's just, we've always enjoyed that time of sitting together. And I even still, with my kids in high school, I'll read to them a few chapters a day or something like that. And it's just it's our family time that we enjoy. And so it was a little bit different for us to only have the one novel in the literature, but we did enjoy the short stories and the way that you broke them up. And something we especially enjoyed was having the background on the authors and things like that.
Yes.
That brings so much more to the story when you know the author's background. And so that was something that was really neat. And then just the conversation starters that were in there. I didn't have my kids do much actual writing of the answers, but we talked about it. We discussed things. And, it opened up a lot of really deep, meaningful conversations for us that I'm very thankful that we were able to have.
Mm-hmm. You talk about not doing all of the work. So we as teachers know that we never do all the work, right? I never finished a textbook that I started with my students. I never did all the activities that were in the textbook. Nope. And so I'm so glad that you said that as a parent, because a lot of parents struggle with, we can't get it all done. There's too much. And so, when we create curriculum, we want to offer a good quality for the parent. So we don't want to just put 2 or 3 questions and, they're saying that's all we have. So, but a lot of times parents who are unaware think the students have to do everything. So even the fact that you brought up about having the conversations, it's just as effective in literary analysis to have those verbal conversations as it is to actually write out an answer. And so I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think that relieves a lot of parents from feeling like they are stuck having to do everything and answer every question and do every activity, because it's just not the case.
Yes.
Right. So whenever you went through the novel, you all were using Essentials in Literature Level 10, and that novel was the To Kill a Mockingbird, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And that's a classic that you may have already read. Is that true?
Yes, I read it with my older son who has already graduated.
Yes. Okay. Now, had either of your 2 children that were using Essentials in Literature read To Kill a Mockingbird?
No, they hadn't. And that was one of the main reasons that we chose that level.
Oh, that particular level is because you wanted to do that classic. Okay, awesome. So as you're working through the novel, like it's over a 6-week period, right? And we're doing, a section of work over a few chapters. And then there's this section, this kind of like a mini culmination of that section where there's several different literary focuses that they do and things like that. And one of the features that we have with those literary focuses, and you probably saw it also in the fiction section, is to use graphic organizers to pull information from the students. Now, did you feel like that was effective in helping them to understand just the graphic component, to help them understand how they're pulling information out and putting it into these quote boxes, as opposed to just having a question and writing an answer, having a question and writing an answer? Did you feel that it was more beneficial to have it that way when you're focusing on, let's say, climax or conflict or character analysis? I'm not sure if I worded the question correctly, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. And I'll be honest with you, we didn't use those a whole lot.
Okay.
We talked about, so as we're going through novels, we stop. If something comes up, we stop and talk about it. Yes. And so for us, it was more of like we would get to the exercises in the book and we're like, oh, we've already talked about that because we had stopped and talked about it when we were reading.
Yes.
And so we didn't do as much of the of those types of things in the assignments, because I found that we had already discussed them, I felt like, at length. And so just being honest. But
Yes, but you know what, Melissa, I'm so glad that this is why we do the EIW experience, is because a lot of parents just need to know it's about your experience with your kids. We
mhm,
provide the framework and the material and all the questions and the activities, but you literally get to choose what you do. And
yes,
so the important thing is that there's some literary analysis happening in those conversations. It's happening. It really
right,
is. And we have some families who are much more verbal that way. They love to talk about it. And then we have other families who are much more, I guess you could say, academic and want to actually write everything out. It works
mhm,
for either one. So
it does,
this is the
yes,
beautiful thing about homeschooling, and one of the main reasons we like to do the EIW experience testimonies from parents is because it gives a window for other parents to look into and say, oh, how relieved I am now to know I don't have to do it a certain way, right?
right, yes. Yeah.
So in level 10, besides the novel, was there any short story or nonfiction piece or poetry that really stood out to you all, that your students enjoyed, or what felt like that they learned a lot about literary analysis per se, during that particular piece?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm saying the exact title of it, but the story about the yellow wallpaper.
Yes, yes.
That was a little bit different, but it like sparked the most conversation, I think, and deep thought from my kids, as far as the short stories went. Of course, the novel, that was really deep, but the yellow wallpaper story, it was just so strange, but it gave such insight into, what can happen, what can go on in a person's mind. And,
Yes.
it was really, and I had never come across that story before. So.
That's great. How did you feel about and this is I have a couple more questions and we'll be finished, but how did you feel about the works that we chose? So we always try to look for a variety of different works, and obviously storylines that are interesting to multiple students, because not everyone wants to read something like the Yellow Wallpaper. They may,
Right.
that's so boring or whatever, and I love it. But we try to do a variety. So how did you feel about the literary works that we chose for the whole Essentials in Literature level 10?
Overall, we really liked them. Of course, there are some that, struck a chord more than others.
Yes.
The poetry, most of those, even I had to read them multiple times to really get it.
Yes.
But that's not a bad thing. You're digging deep and trying to, really connect with it. I will say with the poetry, there were several of them that my kids were like, I'm not sure about that. But,
Poetry.
yeah, we only read one of the dramas. Gosh, I can't think of the name of it right now. It was Trifles.
Trifles. Yes.
Is that the one where they're in the house where the person
Yes.
has died? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. That was the one that we read. And that was really interesting. And the kids enjoyed reading that
Yes.
together. And we broke up the parts so that everybody was reading a different part, and that they like to act. So they got into that.
Yeah.
So
Great, great. So Essentials in Literature and Essentials in Writing together combined are the equivalent of what a student, if they were in a public education system, would use to equal an English credit. So do you feel like that everything combined, what you chose to do, what you chose to leave out, did it fit into your year well together to, where you felt like this was a solid English class for a level 10?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it took us a little bit to figure out exactly what schedule would work well for us. We ended up doing one unit of literature and then one unit of writing, because when we were doing a little of both each day with the stories, if we would get to the end where we were doing the independent activity on the story, my kids would have forgotten, details of the story. And so we ended up just doing the literature unit and then a writing unit, so on and so forth. Yeah, it worked really well for us. We did end up, because we skipped a little bit of the drama, we could fit another novel in at the end of the year. And so we went ahead and did that. My daughter was taking world geography, and so we read Around the World in 80 Days.
Oh,
at the end of
Great.
our school year. And so, yeah, but I felt like it was a good, solid high school English program.
The parent-teacher handbook that accompanies the Essentials in Literature, was that helpful to you in any way, or because you already teach, did you need to look through that to kind of figure things out, or?
In the beginning, I used it quite a bit when we were figuring things out and how the program went. As the year went along, I used it less,
Yes.
but yeah, it was very helpful.
Yes. So overall, how would you rate your EIW experience this year?
We really enjoyed it. I would use it again. I feel like it was a good, solid program, and covered all of the basics and gave us a lot. I think the most meaningful thing to us beyond, the mechanics of writing and things like that was just the opportunities that it gave us for discussions, really deep, meaningful conversations with my teenagers. And I love that, that's what I feel like I need to connect with them as they're growing into young adults. So.
Great. Awesome. Well, Melissa, I'm so thankful and appreciate you coming on to share your experience with our parents and our students. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and we appreciate you giving us the chance to partner with you in your children's education. It's people like you who give us this opportunity that allow us to do what we love to do, and that is to teach English and the writing and the literary analysis, and create curriculum, and just enjoy what our passions are all about. So thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. And any last words that you want to say before we go?
I just want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to use the curriculum this year, and I feel like it was a very good addition to our homeschool.
Right.
So thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.